So we'll jump right into it. My guest this morning is Heather Stratford, and I'm just going to let you introduce yourself in terms of like what you're doing, specifically what's going on with Drip7. You can give us some background on you to maybe help set the stage, and then what you're doing with Drip7. And I think that should transition us right into this conversation of micro-learning and talent development. Does that sound fair?
Okay. All right. Well,
let's just do it.
I love that. That was a lot of questions. So let me start. A lot of people ask me, you know, why are you doing this? Like, how did you create Drip7? And Drip7, first of all, the name, drip is a small amount of information. And 7 is you have to hear something 7 times before you actually internalize it and start to use it. So Drip7 is all about how do we change our behavior? How do we kind of move in the direction we want to do? And some people call that micro-learning, right? Taking a lot of information and putting it into small little bits, bytes, drips, whatever you want to say, but breaking it up. Mm-hmm. Now, how did I get here? I'll just give a brief overview. I grew up back east. I did my college in the West. I was not a computer science major. I was more of a international relations, communications, art major. I graduated and ended up going into business and really learning about business in different industries. I've been in the contractor services industry, publishing industry, food distribution, launched private label brands, and did a lot more on the marketing side, which you could, is your forte. I started bridging over and becoming an entrepreneur and started launching some businesses. One of my businesses went really national and I ended up selling it and doing my first exit. And all the way along, a lot of what I was doing was figuring out how to use technology to make our lives better, right? So I'd get into a company, I'd say, gee, you got a lot of calls coming in on your front desk. Like, maybe we should put stuff on the website. Like, I launched websites, I launched ERP systems, and I was bringing technology in. So fast forward, Drip7 actually is my 7th company. And I was on a podcast once and they asked me, so I went back and kind of like said, oh, I guess it is, right? It's the 7th business. I've learned a lot about businesses along the way. Each one has taught me something different. This is the one that I really decided to go get more outside capital for. And how did we really start? I was running Stronger International, which is a global cybersecurity firm. I was working with some large enterprise clients, including clients that are regional healthcare providers, large university systems, even oil and gas, companies that are some of the largest in the entire world. And when I was working with them, they kept asking me for new products. They're like, Heather, give us something better. And specifically the hospital system, I said, well, here's a product. And they're like, Heather, we don't like that one. And I said, well, here's another product. And they're like, oh, we don't like that. And so I turned that question and I said to them, I said, what are you looking for? What do you really want to see? And that prompted that team in security and myself to say, we need behavior change. We need it broken up into smaller sections. We need to have it gamified. We started to scope out something very different. And I brought in a tech team. I scoped a new type of product. And the long story short is, I said to them, hey, I really want to build this. And luckily they turned to me and said, Heather, we think it should be built. We'll sign a 3-year contract before you even have a product. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I go, time out. Who's going to own the IP? And for those of you who are in business, you're like, okay, down the road, that's the important thing, right? And luckily, I wasn't talking to the investment wing of this company. I was talking to the security side. And the security guys go, oh, We could care less about IP. We're a hospital system. And so because of that, I said, great, we're going to be a marriage made in heaven because I really want to build this, but I'm going to need a runway and I'm going to need, you know, a beta and all that. So that got us started. And I really pivoted away from other industries that I had been in, but entrepreneurship is where I have landed. It is certainly not something that I thought about when I was in high school or in college. Somebody didn't say, gee, you're going to run a multinational company when you're, you know, that wasn't even on my radar screen. But that's where I am.
So let's back up a second and talk a little bit about microlearning. So will you give us your definition of what microlearning is?
I see microlearning as taking content and things that need to be trained on and breaking it up into small segments. Now, I've seen microlearning people say under 10 minutes. For me, microlearning means a minute or two. We're talking small. Now, you could have a couple of them joined together, but the research says that up until like 5 minutes, you're paying attention. When you go between 6 and 8 minutes, you start to wane off. And by 9 minutes, unless you're super into the person speaking or into the content they're talking about, your brain is going other places. What's for dinner? Where did I park? You know, are my kids calling me? What's my social media doing? Your brain is someplace else.
So I'm glad you said something about research, because that was going to be one of my questions, was what's the research that this is based on? And is that research more attention span based? Is it learning based? Give me a little bit of a clue on that.
So there's a lot of different research out there. I would say Drip7's core science is based on the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
Okay.
Okay.
I can't spell
now,
that, but I'm going to do my best.
I don't know if I can spell that for you, but it is on our website,
okay.
And you can Google it. And basically, it's research that was done almost 100 years ago.
Wow.
And it said that if you and I are sitting in a training meeting for 1 hour, and we're paying attention, right? We're there, we're training. When we walk out the door, and then somebody asks us to recall that information, within 20 minutes, we have forgotten 50% of the content.
Okay.
And then you go out a full 30 days from that training meeting, and we will remember less than 20%. And that is if we were paying attention. So if you think about the way our education system has been set up, where, hey, Josh, you need training. We're going to put you in a training for 2 hours. Sounds great, right? But we're expecting you to know that information.
Right.
The problem is you walk out that door, and within an hour, you've lost most of it. Within 30 days, you've lost almost all of it. And that's if you were trying to pay attention.
So, okay, so microlearning as a talent development is really about making sure that, so you have an organization, you have your team, and you need them to absorb some piece of content, whatever it is. Whether it's, I mean, I think you started in cybersecurity content, right? So whatever it is, the organization needs you to learn that information, absorb it, retain it. You're suggesting that microlearning is, the idea behind it is going to allow your team to retain that information better and longer?
Yes.
Okay, talk about that.
So let's think about this. Unless you're a real numbers person, when somebody tells you their phone number, right? Do you remember it?
No, we have cell phones now.
Okay.
I remember one phone number, and it's my wife's.
Right. Do you remember it 30 days later? Somebody told you their phone number. Do you remember it? No, we don't remember that because it's in that short-term memory, right? Somebody told it to me. I have a hard time. They tell it to me, and I'm like, oh, and I type it in. I'm like, well, what was the last number? It's such a short-term thing.
That's a chunkified piece of information, though, because we're only really geared to remember about 6 or 7 chunks at a time.
So
and a number doesn't, the phone number in that typically doesn't fit that, like say a name does, like Josh.
So let's just so that our online audience can hear that. So what we're hearing from the audience is like chunks of information,
right,
and whether or not phone numbers or whatever content fits that, and how we, I mean, I want to make sure I get that right. So what the question in there is, a phone number is separate from other pieces of content maybe.
Right,
right?
And you're right, it's a different type of content, but I think it is a good example. Do we remember them?
Yeah.
No. How do I remember a phone number? If I hear it over and over and over again. I call that repetition, okay? And with repetition, that number moves from the short-term memory to long-term memory,
okay,
right? It starts to go in like, I know this number now. Well, all of it. So all of us learn differently. Mm-hmm. There is actually 7 different learning modules. Some people are tactile, some people are audio, some people have to see it. I know I have to write it down and see it for me to kind of remember it. So everybody learns differently. So one of the things is you have to make sure you're not giving training in the same modality every time, because most of your audience and your users or your trainees, they all learn differently. So you need to break it up. So microlearning needs to address each one of these learning styles as well as reinforce the material. So Josh might need to hear it all the time. If he hears it, he's got it. If I hear it, it's in one ear, out the other. If I hear it, yeah, it doesn't work. But if I see it, because I'm more of a visual learner, I got it, because I've seen it. So you've got to show it in these different ways. Now, none of us can really sit down and be in a training for an hour every day. I mean, that's just unrealistic. We don't have enough time to do that. So how do we consistently move forward and train? I go back to, you talked about research, right? The Ebbinghaus forgetting curve gives us this idea that you have to reinforce material to move it from the short-term to the long-term memory, right? The other thing is repetition is key. I look at companies like Kumon. I don't know, some of you might have kids, okay? You might have heard of this. It's basically the Japanese style for learning math. And you have little sheets, and you work on it at home for 6 days, and then 1 day a week you go into their little office, and you're doing repetition. You're doing your multiplication tables. You're doing the things over and over. Why does it work? It works because it's short, it's consistent, and it's repetitive. And it moves into your long-term memory. It's your core. They're going to know it for life.
So before I want to stick on that for a minute. I just want to remind everyone here that's live, ask questions. I'll do my best to repeat it for our online audience. I forgot to give that disclaimer as we were rushing in to get going. The other thing is I normally would take questions from the audience, but I left my laptop on the back room, so we'll just field those later. So if people have questions, go ahead and drop them into the comments on the live stream on LinkedIn. We'll answer those later, although I think Nathan's going to try to bring me his thing. So we have my production assistant is going to bring me the laptop. Okay, so I'll answer questions here if they come in live. So repeat the questions. I want to talk. Is it okay for me to bring up? It's not a competitor, but is it okay for me to bring up another software?
Sure.
Okay, so my family's been doing Duolingo because my kids are in Spanish.
Yes.
My oldest daughter's 7th grade, she's in Spanish, and part of her homework now in Spanish is to do Duolingo. As a part of that, I've started doing it, and it's everything you're talking about. Some of it you have to type out your response. Some of it you have to listen and then talk your response. Some of it you have to watch and read. So they're trying to mix in all the learning that you just talked about, as much of it as they can, into an app. Is that kind of the basis? I don't want to necessarily plug Drip7 a bunch, but I do want to ask, is that the basis for what you're doing with your platform? Is something similar, but obviously your own spin on it?
Right, and what I would say is a lot of people are familiar with Duolingo.
Right.
And they have a lot of branding, they've been around a long time. They have been able to take an industry and move it into microlearning. And Duolingo's a perfect example, and I often use it and say Drip7 is taking that type of learning and moving it into the corporate space for security and compliance training.
Okay.
It's the kind of training that none of us really want to be taking. So it's the eye roll training. It's like, oh, not again. We have to take this. But we do. We all have to learn that stuff. And I am in cybersecurity. And so when people put their head in the sand and say, well, cybersecurity, nobody will attack us. We're not big enough. We're not, right? They have their head in the sand. Everybody needs to get on board, or you will not be in business 5 years from now.
This is not so much, I mean, we have to talk about it because your platform addresses this issue with large teams as a part of talent development and even just when you think about bottom line revenue, right? What a cybersecurity attack can cost a company.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So I'm sitting at my desk, I was in a co-working space, and I get an email from the principal of my kiddo's school, and it says, you need to go into Google Drive and download this thing. I immediately knew that was a phish attack, or what, you know, it was a cyber attack. I'm no joke, as I'm sitting there dealing with that, I say something out loud. Oh, my kid's school is trying to attack me. A guy at another desk who works for Spotify, half his company went down from the same exact attack. Not from my kid's principal, but it was the same coordinated kind of attack. Yes. It was a Google Drive link. You were supposed to click on it, and then it wanted to give permission to Google Drive, right? Which I'm like, I've already done this. Why would I have to do it? So I knew immediately this was all fake. But that attack, that coordinate, it got a bunch of businesses like that same day. So what you're talking about is by having a talent, like a micro-learning talent development tool at your disposal, you're combating issues like this because they're actually learning something.
That's right. So there's two parts to that.
Okay, yeah, take it.
So first of all, the first part is you need to be consistently training your staff. I don't care if you are in a care facility, if you're in a construction industry, if you're in higher education, I don't care what industry you're in. You need to consistently be training your staff. It helps them feel better about their jobs, helps them know what to do, helps you communicate what your expectations are. There's lots of reasons around that. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is, what about when things change, things pivot? There are things that are critical. When an attack comes in, especially electronically, the IT team generally has an idea it's starting to happen, right? Mm-hmm. If they know it's starting to happen, they can push out and say, hey, we see this. One of the things about Drip7 that was so critical about why we wanted to create it is because a lot of the learning over the past several decades is pretty static. It's called what I call off the shelf, right? Like, you want to learn about this, there's a module, it's off the shelf, right? What we want to do is give you the ability to say, last week we saw this attack, we want to make sure you're aware of it, so when it comes back around this week, you see it, right? We want to be really able to address current trends.
Okay.
And micro-learning is designed so that you can put in current trends. As soon as it happens, you can put it in. So yes, you want to train on the old school things. Do this. Everybody needs to learn how to do this. But the current trends and how everybody's evolving so fast, micro-learning can address that. It gives you the tools to change the content.
Because you're not talking about creating a brand new 2-hour-long workshop from scratch based on a current trend. You're talking about module-based, smaller chunk. You said 1 to 2 minute.
That's right.
And that can be, so the effects of this can go beyond, I mean, like I said, you started in cybersecurity, but you're even talking about HR. So if we're seeing a wave of HR trends coming, you know, we saw this during the pandemic with Starbucks dealing with unionization. If we wanted to train employees on some new HR thing that's coming or some trend or something, we can push out content a heck of a lot faster that's retained better by our team and makes us better positioned as a company. I mean, is that kind of the gist?
Yes, and there are several different case studies for this that we're exploring, and we're having our early customers show us how they're using it. Some of them are using it for their sales staff. Hey, we want to get all of our sales staff on the, every morning we're pushing out content to them. We have companies that are doing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they want to make sure that people are being very top of mind and having case studies and things all around DEI. We have other companies asking us more for technical training. They're like, this is great for level 1 training for general users, but hey, our help desk, they need specifics on how to implement OneDrive. Right?
Right.
Okay, so we can say, you're a technical, you're help desk, you get this extra training that goes more in depth into technical areas. So you can stratify it by job role. Because not everybody wants to take a technical training, and not everybody needs to take that training. But the people who do need it, they also need it broken up and repeated and in different formats and consistent and current. That's what microlearning allows them to do.
So when we think about talent development and specifically thinking about you're a company and part of your mission or your values is to provide ongoing support and training for your team, how does this fit into the mix? So, I mean, I think of realtors and they have to do, trainings in their office, or any healthcare that requires, continuing education credits. How does microlearning fit into some of those models? Has it been done yet? Or, are you looking at addressing some of those challenges?
We really are. So our content team is constantly releasing more content every month.
Okay.
And as we get more industry verticals, we are looking at, well, what do you need?
Okay.
What does a real estate office, as opposed to a lawyer's office, as opposed to a medical center, what different content do you need? What we've developed, and what I think is uniquely different about our platform, is that we're creating content libraries that you can tap into, and we want you to use them, and then we want you to bring in your own content. So you can use 80% of ours, and then say, hey, but our company is different, we do this, and you bring in your own content. So we want to give you the tools to make microlearning a part of your organization to train, secure, and engage your staff.
I know it's been hard to divorce Drip7 from the conversation, so I really, it's not intended to be just like, hey, let's plug Drip7 for Business Brew, but they are so connected because it's tied to what you're doing. But microlearning as an idea and a concept, if I'm a business, it's attractive to me not only because I can create custom content for my needs and my team, but I can also tap into your existing library. So how, as a manager, how am I thinking about, so say I'm an HR person and my job is to provide X number of trainings or, to make sure I have it. How am I looking at, what's the message, what's the selling point of microlearning versus the traditional way, if I'm that's the way it's always been done kind of person?
I think that most HR teams realize they'd like to do microlearning.
Okay.
I think the problem is not the sale of it, it's hard, time consuming, and who's gonna do it, right? It's easier to take off the shelf. It's easier to say, I have a new employee, I have off the shelf training, we've checked the box, we've done it. Okay, so it's easier, right? It's hard to say, okay, Josh, you're over an HR department. You have to redo all of our training for all these different job roles.
Okay.
And you have to pull it into microlearning and, hey, we want it rolled out in 4 months.
Got it.
And they're like, deer in the headlights. How do I do that? How do I make it better training? And so most of them, it's such an uphill battle that people, they like the idea of microlearning, but they're like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to take our hour-long PowerPoint that we put everybody through. How do we do this? And so there haven't really been tools out there that were designed that direction.
Okay.
But I think most people would prefer to say, I'll look at a question or two while I'm grabbing my coffee in the morning, rather than sitting in a 2-hour training
when
every quarter.
I worked at Sears in college, and I swear the first 4 days we're sitting in front of a computer, clicking through videos and questions, right? Watch a video, answer a question, watch a video, for hours. I didn't get any on-the-job training until I did that. You're suggesting that as a company, this could be part of a morning routine, a lunch, you know, maybe not lunch because you want them to have their break, but it could be part of a routine that also allows for on-the-job training specific to my role.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And what we see is that the onboarding is a little bit different than the continual training.
Right, because you got new employees, new to the team.
New employees, you have to get through a certain amount. But the problem is, a lot of times you wait till the day you start, and then you walk in, you're all smiles, and you're like, okay, I'm ready, I love my new job. And you get there, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, you have 8 hours of training. Okay, how much do you remember out of those 8 hours?
I remember the pain of it.
Right. You remember it was painful. You probably might remember the first 10 minutes.
Right.
Everything else is a blur in between. Some of us call that like drinking from the fire hose, right? They do it in medical school. They do it in onboarding for different things. And you do not remember. And the problem is, 6 months down the road, when you make a mistake, you do something incorrectly in that job role, they're like, yeah, but we trained you the first day. And it's like, oh, but the first day I was so inundated, I didn't retain it. I think what microlearning does is it helps people retain the information. Yeah.
When you think about the implications just even outside of HR, DEI, but into safety. So you mentioned construction as a place. They are constantly getting trained on fall safety, which is not the season, it's falling off a building. It took me a minute to figure that out when I was like, fall training? What happens in fall? Oh, it's fall down training. So, but they have to do harness training and all this stuff. Well, some of that, it's tactile. I touch the harness, I practice with it, but then there's other parts of safety training when it comes to jobs like construction that go beyond that. And a lot of the company, it's a 1 day a quarter, bring the team in, sit them down, talk about safety. This is something they could do on the job site and do every day to build better retention and habits.
I would actually say that the safety training really started to evolve in the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Okay.
People started wearing the hard hats. You started having meetings. And what were those meetings? They were like 267 days since our last incident, right? All of these things were part of the Deming method, okay? Deming method, you can research it. It was really about a Japanese, when we went in and a consultant was looking at how to help the Japanese rebuild really quickly. And the Deming method was, how do you keep certain things top of mind? So I've actually written about this, how the cybersecurity industry and the training industry needs to take lessons from the Deming method and construction and how we did safety. Safety became top of mind. You have an orange vest, you have the number that says how many days, you have every meeting, you talk about it. That's microlearning.
Okay.
You see it, you hear it, you're talking about it, it's repetitive, it is reinforced. That's microlearning. We're just now more in a digital age. And so how do we take that microlearning and pull it to what we're learning about now? Because most of us aren't in a construction crew. Yes, that's an industry, but most people sit at a desk. Most people work on a computer. Like, our whole world has kind of evolved that direction. And so microlearning in a digital age is a little bit different than how they implement it with the construction industry.
So I want to be mindful of time because we were originally scheduled to go to 9, and then we got a little derailed today, and it's all good. But do you have time to stay for a little long? Okay. And then anybody here live, if you need to go. That's totally fine. I understand. We all have schedules. You mentioned gamification, and we haven't talked about that yet. So I want to double back and talk about that. So give me the definition of gamification, and then talk about how that weaves its way into microlearning. All
right. So great question. Most people, when they hear the word gamified or gamification, they think of Call of Duty or a shoot-up game, okay? They think, oh, that's my teenager in the basement shooting people. That is a type of game, but gamification is taking certain critical parts of that and pulling it into training. So gamification includes leaderboards to know where you're at in your training. It might include point count. Hey, I did something right, I got some points. Like you were talking about Duolingo, all about the points.
Yeah, they have a leaderboard. My wife's like obsessed with being on the leaderboard.
On the leaderboard. Okay, so those are gamification elements. Other things, you have avatars. So you get to say, hey, I'm going to be a rhinoceros today. I'm going to be a frog. My frog got a hat. Like, you get rewarded with your avatar. That's a gamification element. So you're a different kind of person. You're often given a quest. Sometimes you're given a task. You can achieve a certain goal, a badge, a reward, a level. All of that is called gamification. So our traditional training within like the corporate world up until the 90s was all done in person. And then in the mid-1990s, we started to use online training. And people pushed it to LMS systems, learning management systems. And that was a great breakthrough. The problem is we pushed everything there. So now you go in and you have 8 hours of click, 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 and you don't remember any of it. The problem is those LMS systems were never designed for microlearning. So now we're going through another revolution. So, early to 2020 to now, we're evolving to the next generation of training. And that really is incorporating all this gamification, incorporating microlearning, so that it meets with our everyday. You look at Generation Z, the millennials, how are they learning? They're learning by TikTok. They're learning by Instagram. How long are those? They're a minute. Our entire world has shifted. And so corporate training needs to start shifting towards what our personal life is already doing.
Okay. Okay, so if we have a few more minutes, first off, if there's any questions, feel free to throw them at Heather. Not literally, just, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a potential customer, right? You know what I'm going to ask. How do you measure it?
How do you measure the learning?
You're saying to me for yourself. How do I know it's worth it?
Right. Well, each industry is slightly different. But what we normally measure is we measure engagement. We measure, on a security side, we measure how many people are starting to report. We also have phishing tests, so we can see people, oh, they used to be here, but they're now here. When you measure engagement of turnover of staff, are you turning over quite as fast, or are you starting to retain your employees more? So there's many different areas of measurement that are important to an organization, and it depends on what that organization is, right? But I think gamification is a tool, right? It's a tool that helps you plug some holes, gives you more variety, helps you tailor things better so that you can address people's issues.
But microlearning I didn't even think about an employee retention tool as just an overall, scope of talent development is a really key ingredient. The idea that the company is not only great, but the training doesn't bother me, or the training is like I look forward to it, or it's an enjoyable part of what I do.
So on that point, you talked about you worked at Sears or something. Okay,
Yes.
so you went through.
Some people are like, "What's Sears?"
I know. You went through a year, or I'm sorry, a day or two of training.
Yeah.
People say that in the first week or two on a job, a person decides if they're going to stay or not. Okay? So you have a short window to say, this is the company I want to be in. And so you have to put your best foot forward. I know I work with hospital systems. Some of the big hospital systems in the area, they have a 20% attrition rate. So every month they are onboarding 600 to 700 new people.
Wow.
Okay? And if you can't start your training until the day you start, you can't start beforehand, and then you have to, they can't touch a patient until they've gone through all this, you cram it in. Like you cram it, and then they're like, I hate this company. This company's awful. And they don't last. They're gone within 6 months. And so how valuable would it be to have them have a better experience when they come in the door, so that they're like, hey, this company's different. This company's giving me training that's valuable, both personally and at home. And I don't hate it. Like, it's finally better. All of those key factors we're starting to measure, and it depends on your industry, but attrition rate, lowering that, boy, that's, talk about ROI.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money saved.
So, okay, we've talked about microlearning and even gamification and this idea of talent development exclusively in giving employees content they need to either do their job efficiently, safely, whatever, right? Or even teach them about some aspects of the company. I want to talk about that part a little bit more, and maybe this will end up being the last thing we talk about depending on how much time we have. But have you seen companies using it for like mission, vision, values training, and how well has it been received? Has it been a question you've been asked about? And again, I know we have to figure out how do we divorce this from Drip7, and we might not be able to.
Yeah, I think your point is exactly right. Bringing in mission, vision, and values is a critical part of making training valuable. Yeah. Right? I actually tell people, get a 60-second video of the president of the company about how they like the microlearning, what they're learning, and put it out there. Yeah. Because you have to show that leadership likes it, leadership's behind it. You show that it's personalized, so you can have, you know, in your microlearning, you could push out something like, what was the year our company was founded? And have points. So if you got it, you know, you're learning about the history of that company. Right. It's also important to have it branded to you, so that the person coming in says, oh, this isn't off the shelf. This isn't some generic training they're just pushing me through. This is catered to my job. This is catered to the company. And this is something I need to pay attention to. And oh, by the way, my boss is on my leaderboard. So he's watching, or she's watching me, and I'm like, oh, I guess I have to do this. Or compete with them. That would be so much fun if you were competing against the CEO. That's right. So when it comes to, you know, mission, vision, values, there's that famous story of the Zappos founder paying new employees $2,000 to quit, right? As a way to define who are the right people for the team. They had a really strong culture and they wanted to maintain that. This could be one of those tools that you could also use as a management person to go, who are the people who fit our team? And you could even look at the microlearning and go, well, how are they doing on the platform? Who's engaged? Who's not engaged? Are you seeing any sort of I don't want to say hiring and firing, but that's what it comes down to, tied to microlearning performance? Well, we certainly don't give any litmus test of, hey, you should do this. Right. But companies have their own, they know this is one more metric they can use. I'll give you an example. We have a technology company. Okay. They have about 25 employees. And they are using the platform in microlearning. They're pushing out a lot of content. They haven't even added their own content in. They're using pretty much our content. One of the things we found is they have 2 or 3 people in their organization that just don't do it. Now, they're not the owners. The owners are on the leaderboards. The owners are there.
That's
right?
great.
They have 2 or 3, and these are old-time employees, and they're like, oh, you know, it's a waste of my time.
Right.
And this company is about ready to fire these people because they've said, you really can't take a minute of your time to refresh on something so critical. And, you know, that's their choice. But it's one more indication that they might not be the right team member. Like, they're like, well, everybody else can do it, but I'm better, I'm different, I know it. The irony is, those are the people that are the biggest, weakest link because they're doing poor behavior.
Right.
And so it's just one more thing that an HR person could say, and here's another area where we see you're not performing to standard.
When you think, and we don't have enough time to dig into this, and I can't believe I'm just thinking of this now, but that ties into the convenience of microlearning.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about a tool that's available on my smartphone, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. If I'm at my desk, or if I could go on a walk outside the building and do some microlearning and get some fresh air. You know, it's not a huge time consuming. So really, to that point, those employees are making a decision to not even do something that's very time consuming and is also convenient for them. And we didn't talk about that as another selling point to, you know, HR directors or whoever, that microlearning is do it wherever, right? It's really simple and easy to access.
Yes, I tell people, if your routine is grab coffee in the morning, do it while you grab coffee. If you take an elevator and it takes forever to get up into your office, do it in the elevator. If it's, hey, I need to take a break and go out, some people smoke, some people walk around and do yoga, right? Whatever your routine is, micro-learning, we all have to do it. Going back to your Duolingo, you're going to learn the language so much better because you're moving it from short-term memory to long-term memory.
Right.
And it's the reinforcement over time that's going to make the difference. We have to bring that into corporate culture so that the right behaviors are done when they're needed.
Okay. Do we need, you got a question?
Yeah.
Okay, good, perfect.
Yeah, I just kind of looking towards the future, you know, in production, so I think a lot about the technology. Have you, where do you think in 5 years will we be using more like augmented reality or VR? I've seen that come into training a lot as a way to engage. And you talked about like, you know, ways that you internalize things and memorize things, engaging all the senses, you know, is one way to do that. So my question is, do you see in 5 years, 10 years, more augmented reality and VR learning, and will there be more AI presence? Will a lot of the maybe heavy lifting of doing all the copy and stuff be offloaded to like AI?
Okay, so I want to repeat that so people watching on LinkedIn, because there are people watching on LinkedIn, so I want to make sure they hear that. So the question is, do you foresee in the future AI dictating or helping or assisting with content? And do you see augmented reality or VR playing a role in microlearning? So that's a pretty good loaded question, but we'll end on this one. So this will be our last question.
And the answer is yes and yes. Okay. So for AI, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're all looking at the ChatGPT, we're looking at what's happening. AI is definitely going to be involved with creating both written and other types of content. And that's going to be a trend that's not going to go away.
Right.
As we move into VR, right? VR, right now, you have a headset, like you're in that reality. Yes, that's a great way for you to really remember. You're walking through, you're engaged with it. But there's a lot of cost involved with both creating VR and then also the headsets and that whole process. Microlearning is taking something that pretty much all of us have right now and using our current technology of a desktop, a laptop, a phone, using that to help us break things up.
Got it.
So I would say that microlearning will start to move closer to VR, closer in those directions. I would say that AI specifically will impact microlearning significantly, and in our platform, we are pulling that in.
Okay. So round of applause for Heather for joining us today. Thank you, Heather. And I just thanks to everyone who made it. For those of you on LinkedIn, if you're not local to Spokane, we had some snow on top of snow. It's a late February, early March snowstorm. Not that we're not opposed to it, but I think the general consensus I got from the group this morning is they're over it. And I'm like, I'm going skiing tomorrow, so I'm not over it. So I appreciate everyone who made it out. Just a big thank you to Nathan Slaybaugh with Slab Visuals for helping us with video today, and Bernardo Wills for providing the Bissinger room. So the room is available for corporate events if anybody's looking for that. Again, thanks to Heather for joining us. She's with Drip7. If you have any questions, continue to comment on the live stream. We didn't get any yet, but I did notice there's quite a few people watching. So any questions come up. And then we are back in April. I want to say it's the 13th. Don't quote me on that. And our guest will be Katrina Rogers. We haven't settled on a topic yet, but she's a wealth of knowledge from everything from drug manufacturing and development all the way through talent and leadership development. So we'll have a really interesting topic. Not sure what it'll be, but Katrina will be our guest next month. So again, thanks Heather for joining us today. Thanks to everybody who made it, and thanks to those on LinkedIn who watched it. And that's it.